I think, day to day, moment to moment, how are you going to focus your attention? Because when you really dissect what it is like to be human and these notions of free will, you didn't choose your parents, you didn't choose your genetics, you didn't choose the environment or the era in which you were born, you didn't choose the religious or economic or cultural systems of your country. You didn't choose a lot of these things. You didn't choose all the chains of prior causal events that, then instantiate the realities of your life. You didn't choose serendipity and randomness that might happen to occur at any moment. But you do have some agency. And that agency, as far as I can tell, is where we focus our attention moment to moment. So ask yourself that seminal question, if you're listening and going into this year, where am I focusing my attention moment to moment? Because as I said, as far as I've been able to excavate, that is the crack in the window of agency, of free will.
Hello, how's it going? Welcome to the Happy Pear podcast. I'm David.
And I'm Stephen.
And I'm Sarah.
Hope you're doing well.
Yeah.
Hope you're feeling good, and I hope you're happy in your own skin. Genuine.
That's very nice.
Yeah. So welcome. These little intro segments were meant to have something prepared and be a bit organised and have something funny to say. I forgot to do my homework, so Sarah's probably going to fill it in with something really funny.
Over
to you, Sarah.
Over to me. Well, we never, I think by saying that we have something planned, Dave, is quite embarrassing because these are normally quite a fumble.
Okay,
but I did have a little thought there where I was just thinking of our morning routines and how our days really never change. Like our winters, summers and everything are exactly the same. Like I basically called Dave and I'm like, hey, where are you? You're like, I'm at home eating my chia seed pudding. I'm like, great, can I come over in 5 minutes? I waddle over, you're having a foot bath. And the only thing that makes me realize it's winter is the fact that you're having a foot bath. In the summer, there'd just be no foot bath.
We're sitting in the garden.
And then Steve comes along and he's like, oh, foot bath, great, can I jump in? And then the two twins have all 4 feet in this tiny little foot bath.
It is a nice way to start the day.
It
with
is.
a touch of luxury. Because just to give a context, with swimming in the sea every day, it's cold. And this time of year, my body certainly feels cold. So putting it in a hot foot
And you
bath
also don't
after.
shower.
Well, I do. I'm not like dirty. It was part, I've had these chats, I've had these conversations with Sam, my wife, who's strongly encouraging me to, just embrace that side of myself, that like just because I'm a man doesn't mean I can't be like a really good washer.
Well, her one thing in her
wedding vows, I believe.
yeah.
David,
Was to change my clothes more. That's one of my vows. Now this is all
How's that
focused
going,
on me,
Dave?
and I feel like I'm blushing. I changed my clothes yesterday.
you have actually. I've
I
noticed
do.
that.
I do try to. I have
For
improved.
those of you who can't see, David is wearing a shirt today.
I feel this is a little like a therapy session for Dave. But growing up in a family of 4 boys, obviously, changing your clothes and washing wasn't the biggest priority in my life.
What was the priority, Dave?
Having fun and like running and chasing balls, like physical footballs and things, in case you're wondering, and just getting out and doing stuff.
I was going to say it's like competitiveness between the two twins.
And it could have been competition over like dinner, getting more dinner, or it could have been competition over
Who can brush
doing
their
your
teeth
homework,
quicker.
or it could be like
Yeah.
we competed over.
But my point there, the story, just to wrap it up and get a bit of closure on this before we move on to today's therapy session, is that like that wasn't like washing. We didn't compete about washing and changing our clothes. So both of us have a bad habit, and this is back to masculinity. I think both of us have a slightly skewed version of masculinity. I'm masculine. I don't wash that much. Real men don't wash that much, and they don't change their clothes that much. And I've started kind of evaluating that over the last while and go, okay, well, it's good to change my clothes more and to wash more. And I'm not just like, I'm not smelly and stinky. Sometimes I am actually. Most of the time I'm not.
And what about your kids? Do you enforce washing on them?
Absolutely. I've gotten a habit. Sorry, this is about me again, but I've started brushing my teeth twice. I've
Don't
always
mind me
only brushed
here.
my teeth once a day. And my dentist, he's super lovely. He says, no, your dental hygiene's not bad at all. It's not great, but it's not bad. And recently I've started doing it in the morning too, and I really like it.
That's
Brilliant.
great. Well
Go,
done.
Dave.
Yeah, thanks.
What about you, Steve?
I tend to struggle with it, a bit like Dave.
Dental hygiene or
No, dental
showering?
hygiene, I'm all right. Dental hygiene, I'm reasonably good. we live in an old house, and we've got an old the showers in an old, those lovely kind of cool baths. Those they're kind of
Ones with
romantic.
the 4 legs,
The four
cast
leg
arm bath.
cast arm bath, and the shower's in it. So there's one step that kind of gets in the way of getting in the shower. It just seems one little bit further. I often wonder, maybe we had a shower that didn't have the step, but I use it more. And then I think I'm only fooling myself. It's just, I swim in the sea every day. I do shower a few times a week. But it's definitely not something that, I can't wait to get in the shower. Woo!
You're the type of person, Steve, that if I went to your house for the first time and there was no door into the bathroom, I wouldn't be surprised. I remember going to the toilet and I had Ned, Theo, and I think May was the only one in your family who wasn't shouting and talking to me. And I was like, okay. Lovely family. For the record, I shower every day and I brush my teeth twice a day. Yeah.
I like, okay, well, they say for your microbiome, just to give a bit of context, just to kind of leave the conversation.
To give a why day.
To give a why. Scientifically, now, our not showering too much is scientifically proven that for a healthy microbiome, they say it's like, you want a bit of bacterial biodiversity and like
Kind of
not
once
to
a week,
wash
once, twice a
excessively.
week. Yeah, once, twice
And
a
not
week.
to use too much soap. So,
No, it was okay. It was
I love this.
I'm getting
it was a
nailed here.
gastroenterologist. Wait, let me try to remember her name.
Robin Shutkan, she wrote a book called "Live Dirty, Eat Clean," and she started rewilding herself to improve her microbiota.
And one thing
so take that.
one thing
Shireen,
she
Sarah.
had to move from was sharing every day to sharing once or twice a week because she found the benefits were wonderful for her microbiome.
And where is she now?
She went for Surgeon General in the US and nearly got it, so she's pretty big deal.
Okay, great.
So there we go. So back at you.
Anyway,
Jeez, I'd take my jumper off there. I got so hot, and I'm going to need a shower later because I just got so hot there. Actually, I bathed. I had a bath last night.
And you do jump in the sea every day, so I'll give you that.
That isn't
I
washing
jump in
though.
the sea without a bar so bad. This time of year tends to be quite
Anyway,
quick.
right, we're gone way up.
Okay, anyway, this week's podcast, we're excited about it. We really genuinely are. And I think it's kind of in around our sweet spot. Like, it's like this business, philosophy, spirituality,
Community
and
belonging.
community. And a
Yeah,
sense of belonging.
Jeff Krasno, super cool dude, an American man, serial entrepreneur, started a company, co-founded a company called Wanderlust, which became a $25 million company. It was like a yoga events with music and nature. This
Yoga
company,
before it was cool, right?
yeah, it was before cool. It was back like in
It was described
1990s.
as the Coachella for the wellness space.
Yeah, pretty cool. And subsequently now he's been married for 27 years.
32 years.
Oh, thank you, Stephen. Excellent work. And he was featured as part of Oprah's Super Soul Sunday Top 100 as
Entrepreneurs.
as a very impressive entrepreneur. Certainly, he's been in the wellness space for nearly 40 years. Really impressive man, father of 3 daughters, and wonderful pondering and interest in culture, life,
And meaning.
and meaning. So yeah, one of his big things is purpose and finding your true north. So yeah, I really enjoyed this one. Jeff is a really gorgeous, soulful man, and I really think you're going to enjoy this one. Before we start, I just wanted to tell you, if you are interested in wellness, if you're interested in forming new habits, eating more plant-based, moving more, meditating more, we've got our Happy Mind course. It's brilliant. It's done in our new app. You can go to our website, thehappypear.ie, for more details on it. We've had more than 50,000 people through our online courses. They're fantastic. I love them. I get so much passion and pleasure out of helping people transform their lives.
Our apps are available on the App Store and the Google Play Store.
But you need to be a member to sign up for them.
There you go. Anyway, check them out. Cheers.
Are you a learn by because maybe I'll give an example here, because I remember Steve beside me here, he was a snowboard instructor, and this is in Canada about 20 years ago. And he's like, Steve learns by doing. Like, he's an absolute physical, needs to experience it and multiple times before he kind of processes and learns it. And I remember he was trying to learn to do a 360, like come off a ramp and then do a flying 360. And he said he went down and threw himself up off this ramp for a full week, like hundreds of attempts. And finally he got it. He nailed it. And for the full week, his friend Connor was sitting there watching
It was
him.
Simon.
Oh, Simon. Oh, sorry. Don't let the truth get in the way of a good story. Anyway, Simon was watching him. He was sitting there watching him for the full week. And then Simon's first go, he got up and he did it. And he just watched it. And it's just, I think there's 2 different schools of learning. And one of them is learning by doing, and one of them is learning more by kind of theorizing and then kind of applying and contemplating. And I wonder, are you more the doing kind?
The doer, the contemplator.
That's a really interesting question. And I'll apply it I mean, for let's say like Buddhism, for example. So I'm a little bit of I'm a lay person as it pertains to Buddhism, but it is a methodology, I'll call it, that I'm fascinated by, and I study it quite a bit, and there is a lot of concepts to Buddhism, but at the end of the day, the real goal of Buddhism is to actually let go of your clinging to all concepts and just experience oneness, integrated consciousness, or what Buddhism calls samadhi. And in that way, it is a religion, or I wouldn't call it a religion, really a science or a methodology based around direct experience. Like, you can only actually eat its fruits by experiencing it directly. And so I think we can get quite caught up in thought and into intellectualization, and I certainly am apt to do that. But I yearn for that direct experience. The former comes quite easy to me. Like, I'm endlessly curious about learning things. Like, in the last 6 months, along with the rest of the world, I've become a microbiologist, a gastroenterologist, a cardiologist, a pulmonary expert,
a sourdough baker.
Not as good, but actually we do have a culture in our fridge, and a fermenter. But then you do have to reify these thoughts, to make them, I think, valid. Or meaningful. So I think I'm more of I take things in more intellectually, but I will say there's an exception to that, because physical activity, like, I grew up playing tennis, and I played competitive tennis, and I'm still pretend that I'm 25 out there. In fact, I'm playing against this kid today who will certainly kick my ass. And I'm 51 and he's 29, and he's like a specimen, and he played Division I college here in the United States. But the moment I get out there, I'll think I'm 29 too. And this is dangerous for someone with a
Go
back.
Jeff, go Jeff.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. I mean, from the outside, the appearances are good. The score line is never impressive. But for tennis, I actually learned quite visually. Like, I grew up watching, Bjorn Borg and John McEnroe, these kind of guys on TV. My father was like one of the first people to buy one of these VHS cassette, video players. It looked like a piece of furniture. It was like a credenza in itself, and it sat on top. It was bigger than the TV, and you could put these big VHS tapes in there. And we would have, what was the US Open, which was one of the 4 big Grand Slam tennis tournaments. And I would sit there as a kid, and I would record them all on this VHS. And then I'd watch them back, and I'd stand in front of the TV and mimic the physical action. So, John McEnroe was a lefty. I'm a lefty. Jimmy Connors was a lefty. I'm a lefty. So they both had very distinct different styles. So I had my Jimmy Connors game, and then I had my McEnroe game. My McEnroe was a very finesse-like player, and he was always kind of like jumping up and down gingerly every time he hit the ball. And so there was like these gesticulations that he would make. And then I would go out on the tennis court, and I would mimic what I watched on TV. And, then I'd go out with my friends, many of whom were excellent players. And, I would say, okay, today I'm John McEnroe, and I would, mimic his style and the whole thing. And they'd pick another player. We had endless fun doing that. So I think, with yoga, I certainly have a lot easier time watching someone doing it and then mimicking it versus my wife, barking a bunch of Sanskrit at me. I'm just like, what? Put my heel behind my leg, over my ear with my back, and externally rotate my shoulder. Why? I just get lost in that stuff. So, yeah.
Very good. That's a good one.
Well, one topic I want to jump in with you, Jeff, is the topic of purpose. I know with Wanderless, you kind of put it down, or one of the goal of it is to find your sense of your true north, or connecting with your inner self. And, you know, a lot of these words, and to many people listening, you know, they could be cliched. What is your true self? You know, what is your true north? The sense of, why are we going north anyway? But just, I think the overriding theme, sorry, not so good.
Good man, Steve.
Not so good at the THs. But the underlying concept is that sense of purpose. And I wonder if you could talk about the topic of purpose and finding purpose. And
certainly in your life, because you've had, you know, you're quote unquote successful. Like, you've had businesses that have been great successes. You're married. You've got a number of kids. Like, you've got, you know, from the outside you look in, you're into Buddhism, you're into spirituality. You've got lots of curiosities. Like, what's your purpose and what is your take on it? And how is that relevant to people listening?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay.
Big question there now.
There's a number of different levels of meaning or purpose. And, you know, Viktor Frankl is a hero of mine and just absolutely brilliant author. And he claims that you find your meaning or your purpose in 3 different places. So you find it in your relationships, in your work or creativity, and you can also find your meaning or purpose in your suffering. And you can ask yourself, am I worthy of my suffering? And that was a phrase that he borrowed from Dostoevsky when he wrote Man's Search for Meaning. So I think about that. And I think about all of those 3 categories. And I give them primacy. So with my relationships, you know, okay, how present am I day to day, moment to moment in my relationships? Am I thrusting my needs or the requirements of my ego onto someone else such that I can feel good, so I can satisfy this symbol that I have for myself that I call my ego? Or am I in a place of giving, of actually investing in someone else's thriving and well-being? So I often measure that when I'm trying to be aware, you know, with my children or with my friends or with my family, like, how present am I in this moment for somebody else? And that is a good metric for meaning, because the more present you are for the people within your ecosystem that you love, the more you will register high on the purpose meter. And this will always come back to you, which is always the amazing discovery that you have over and over again, is that, you know, compassion and presence for somebody else is actually a gift that you give yourself. And it seems anachronistic almost, but so relationships is a huge one. And then your work. And I really think about this as creativity and curiosity. What is your state of being when you wake up every morning? Are you absolutely excited to delve into the day? Do you have myriad things? I mean, for me, there's so many things that I am excited about that it almost does create a little bit of anxiety. I actually have to watch myself there because I'm so interested and captivated by my work. And I think the metric for this is in your perception of time. So are there chunks within the day, what I call ultradian cycles, these 90-minute cycles, that are sort of part of the overall circadian cycle, where that seem just to disappear into thin air because you're so engrossed in the excavation of a certain topic or curiosity or creative work or endeavor. So again, that also comes down to presence. And so when I think about playing the piano or learning something or reading something, or whatever activity I happen to be engrossed in, am I 100% there in my work? And so I think, you know, those work and relationships takes you a really long way or into meaning and purpose. And then there is this very thorny, complicated topic of suffering. And, there's this trope in the spiritual circles or wellness circles. I'm sure you have come across it. I mean, everyone has that, pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. And okay, so on some level, yeah, a lot of our anxiety, a lot of our suffering could be categorized as phantoms of our own projection. We have trauma in our life where we focus on that trauma of the past and project it into the future and create what I call negative anticipated memory. So we're actually creating memories that are negative that haven't even come to pass yet. And so many of us live that way. So that is true. But, that aphorism that, pain is inevitable and suffering is optional, it really, it almost demeans the work that one has to go through to actually expiate themselves of trauma. You don't confront your phantoms, with just a green juice or a magic pill. Oftentimes, managing your suffering and your trauma is really hard wrought work, and really requires a dedication to a tremendous amount of inner work. And then what is on the other side of that? And this is what we have to ask ourselves. So there's a wonderful author, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, writes a lot about grief, and dealing with pain and suffering. And this is not something that we're ever taught, at least in my school growing up. It was not part of the curriculum. Like, how do you manage grief? 5 steps. So this is something that we all, often have to learn on our own. And, there's this meandering line, to managing suffering in one's life. It's denial and anger and bargaining and depression, and then finally some kind of acceptance, hopefully. And then what comes on the other side of that? And can you find meaning on the other side of your grief? So, for example, I just interviewed this woman yesterday, Scarlett Lewis, whose son was murdered at the Sandy Hook Elementary School massacre in 2012 in the United States. It was one of the biggest mass shootings, at least at that time. Unfortunately, there's been 350 school shootings in the United States since 2012. Wow! But she lost her son that day, and obviously she went through a period of grief, but she found compassion for the killer, for Adam Lanza. And she started to do research about his life, about how he had been diagnosed with a bunch of different mental illnesses and depression. He was anorexic at the time of the killing. He was a shut-in. He was
what
obviously
does a shut-in mean?
Well, he never left his room.
Okay,
and
wow.
And he had no therapy support. He had no wellness modalities. He had no meditation practice. He had no access to help. And so what she decided was like, the best thing I can do in this moment is to in order to prevent other shootings like this, is to start a foundation called the Choose Love movement, where she brings social and emotional learning to children. And she did that because she found compassion for her son's killer. I mean, if you can imagine that, she found forgiveness there.
It sounds really like Byron Katie's work, because I remember one year, a good decade ago, going to her New Year's Eve cleanse in LA. A friend ended up over there, and I wasn't really familiar with work, but she I was sitting there in the room and she had someone up there who was raped, and she kind of did her process, her 4 questions. And the person, you know, it was all about the person getting compassion for the person who, you know, raped her. And I watched this woman kind of transform, and the amount of tears and whatnot, until she kind of felt like a genuine kind of heartfelt, and it certainly looked it anyway, watching it, where she felt, you know, where she really felt like she connected with this person who had raped her. And that was part of the forgiveness process, it seemed.
Yeah. And, you know, and so we all, I mean, Scarlett's situation and her circumstances were so egregious and so gruesome and odious that many of us might see our own grief as trivial relative to hers. But she tells this story about how then she and her elder son, who was left alive, went and met a bunch of kids from Rwanda, and then heard their stories. And they were like, well, our grief is trivial in comparison to theirs. And so I think the moral of that story is that, you know, we all have grief. You know, we all are managing this basic human condition, which the Buddha called dukkha, and which is unsatisfactoriness, which is suffering, which is frustration. And the question then comes, what will we make of that? And with the limited free will and agency that we have, how can we find meaning within that default human condition? So, you know, that I believe is the hardest and most arduous place to find meaning and purpose in one's life. But in some ways, I think the most fulfilling. So
what an answer. Relationships. So we got like finding meaning in relationships, being more present in relationships, being more present in work and creativity, and somehow finding meaning in suffering. And when you're talking about the third one of finding meaning in suffering, it made me think of like when I feel crap, like some days when I feel crap, I'm kind of aware that there might be a frustration or an anxiousness within me. And I'm also aware that and I'm kind of excited that when I can actually just be with it, for when it passes, because when it does pass, there is like the state of presence afterwards is so rewarding. You know, when it and I think of it sometimes, I feel pressured about work or I feel something or whatnot, and then throughout the day it passes, and then I'm left with this peace, and it kind of like, I think that's part of it. It's finding that, realizing that suffering is part of it, and then when it, a bit like the clouds part and the sun comes out.
Yeah, well, the nature of emotion and suffering is always transitory. And our great challenge is to not fixate on it and identify with it, but come to a state of understanding or a sensation that we are the precondition for observing and witnessing it as phenomenon passing moment to moment in our life. So we didn't put that frustration there. It simply appeared like a thought, or a sound, and it will arise and it will subside. And the more practice or meditation that one engages with, the more refined one's capacity is just to witness it and observe it arise and subside. And that's it. And, oftentimes, like I think about anxiety and that feeling of anxiety. And it's, that butterflies in your stomach, or maybe you feel a little bit nauseous and your heart rate is up and your respiratory rate increases. And maybe that's associated with a particular kind of phobia or public speaking or going to the doctor's office or whatever it happens to be. We all have that. And notice quietly how similar that physical sensation is to actually being excited about something positive in your event, in your life. And the only difference between that sensation and the sensation of excitement of, my daughter going to her, end of the year dance, or going to a party, or going to a New Year's event, or, having a big event in your life, or a book release, or et cetera. The only difference between those sensations is the valence, the emotional valence we assign to it. So oftentimes the physical sensation is quite similar. And so in a way, and it's like over time, you become able to witness these phenomena arise in consciousness in your field of awareness without assigning valence or salience to them, just actually witnessing them arise and subside. And of course, that's a
You
skill.
said two words there. You said
time.
two words. You said two words there: valence and some other word beginning with S that I can't remember now.
Salience.
Salience. What do they mean? Like,
So-
I agree with everything that you said. Like that, the sensations are so similar between suffering and then also with excitement.
Even if you think about it in Spanish, nerviosa, in English, you know, when you think of nervousness, it's seen as a negative thing. It has a negative construct and it's seen through kind of, that's bad. Versus in Spanish, nerviosa can also mean positive. It's kind of in this neutral space. And I think what you described there is literally that we tend to see.
And
this excited possible, it's literally down to the paradigm which we see the world, and ultimately that's, you know, we can create a heaven of hell or a hell out of heaven depending on our perspective or our paradigm.
That's exactly it. That's funny. I didn't know that etymology in Spanish, but I will refer to that. I'll borrow that license free from you.
And then enamorado or whatever, isn't that like to love someone? Te quiero is like, I want you. To say I love you is I want you, which is like, you know, the way we in our culture nowadays, like love, that's the feeling that most of us want to get. And it's so romanticized that you're in a new relationship and the love and the feeling, and that's kind of what we're all looking for. And then when you use that word in Spanish, when you say I love you to someone, it's te quiero, which means I want you, because there's this like needy, slightly desperation. I want to own you and possess you. And that's kind of part of the feeling as well, which I think is very interesting, the roots of words.
Yeah. Yeah. In terms of valence, I often use that word when I'm talking about empathy. So empathy can be understood as the donning of someone else's emotional clothing. Okay. But it doesn't have a particular valence to it. So in other words, you might associate with someone's misery and take on that immiseration, or you might associate with someone's joy and take on their happiness. So because empathy doesn't have a valence to it, it's neither positive or negative. It doesn't have a specific charge. It could go either direction. So I think there's something interesting between this idea of empathy and compassion, for example, where, like I said, empathy is protean. There's another good word. It's flexible in terms of the emotion that you take on. So you might be sad because someone else is sad, or you might be happy because someone else is happy. And you have an emotional intelligence or sensibility that allows you to connect with that happiness or sadness easily. But compassion always has a positive valence. It is always about bringing an effusive kind of loving kindness to the presence of suffering. So it always is positive. And it also always has agency. Like empathy doesn't necessarily have agency. You can feel bad for someone or feel happy for someone, but you don't really need to do anything about it. But compassion always has a positive valence. You're always bringing loving kindness in a positive and effervescent way to a situation of suffering. And you're doing it with the express intent of alleviating that suffering. And this is why compassion is perhaps the highest of all virtues. And so not only are you bringing loving kindness to the presence of suffering in a manner that intends to alleviate that suffering, but compassion, just the word itself, is that it's concomitant with all of these kind of like Ubuntu in African culture, or Buddhist concepts of mutual interdependence, or I think there's a Japanese concept, Jiji Muji, I think it is, where essentially they all mean something similar, which is I am because we are. it's yoga, it's absolute utter sense of connection, where you stop seeing yourself as a separate individual, separate from this external universe, separate from each other, in competition with each other, separate from nature, in competition from nature, separate from the divine, all of this. And you see yourself as absolutely integrated into the logos, into the fabric of life, where my plight and my existence has no separation from yours, that we just appear, that there is only the world, that the phenomenon of what it is like to be Jeff Krasno has no separation from what it is like to be a tree, or what it is like to feel happiness or sadness. And so compassion, once you begin to engage in active compassion, where you are bringing loving kindness to the presence of suffering, you begin to embody a state of being, of integrated consciousness, of what the Buddha called samadhi, or in Hindu traditions, moksha, or I suppose in Christian traditions, Christ consciousness or unity consciousness, where those walls of separation really break down, where the ego dissipates, and you really feel this sense of integration with the world around you. And once you are able to achieve glimpses of that state, a lot of like really beautiful epiphanies emerge, and you start to see like this coherence within nature, and how that there's this intelligence, this foundational intelligence in the world that is always trying to bring opposites together into coherence and beauty. That, you know, we have these amazing plants that grow, this photosynthetic life that, you know, catalyzes the sun's energy to create oxygen and glucose so we can exist, you know, and that then we take that oxygen and glucose and synthesize it and create carbon dioxide and water, which is what they need to exist. This is complete mutual interdependence. And these kind of systems like the carbon cycle exist everywhere in nature, that the dance, this tango of positive charges and negative charges repulse and attract each other, and they form energy, electricity. Or the foundational component of an atom whose integrity is bound through the positively charged proton and the negatively charged electron, or the yin and the yang in Eastern religions, you know. So what you begin to see, you know, as you become more integrated into the fabric of life, is that we are constantly in this dance, and within this energy field of pulling opposites into coherence, and that gets to be like a really exciting enterprise.
Oh, I love that.
That's a gorgeous expression. Integrated into the fabric of life. Like that's, and I think what you're saying there is to kind of like, you know, as you said, to kind of where where you start to melt more and become, there tends to be more of a union with life.
Well, like I think to create a greater context, the sense of so many of modern day living celebrates the individual and vindicates the individual when they're not doing what society wants them to do. And I think the more us as individuals can remember that we're part of the greater fabric of life, and to lose that sense of ego drive and that sense of think more as that sense of the more we move into well-being, harmony of life, and we kind of tend to surrender, and life just happens. We don't happen life happens to us, and it just kind of flows in this beautiful, in an easier, less forced way.
Except the challenges of that is that, like, you know, the kind of current culture which we're all fed is like, you know, everyone wants to be successful and have lots of money and have a house and have a beautiful partner or not. And, you know, the dream that most people are looking for is very ego and egocentric. So this is at a complete juxtaposition to, as you said, to melting into the fabric of life and surrendering more to that process. So it's almost like society and modern current culture is telling us ego. It's telling it, you know, you can have it all, you can be it all. Yet, like, the more we can melt into the fabric of life and surrender our ego, probably the more harmonious and probably the more present life is going to be.
Absolutely. Well, I think what you just described was what Lao Tzu, the originator of Taoism, called Wu Wei, which is effortless action, which is action without intent. So, and a lot of people confuse this with lack of ambition, but it's actually not true. It's actually just moving through life with the grain of the wood and not against the grain of the wood.
Oh, I like that. The grain of the wood. That's nice. With the wind at your back as opposed to into the wind.
Exactly. Yeah. It's planting in rich soil instead of trying to inject endless chemical fertilizers and glyphosate into arid, degraded soil. I mean, there's a million metaphors that you could pull from it, but that, and don't confuse it with lack of ambition. People can still want to instantiate better quality of life and greater well-being, without necessarily being so attached to the outcomes all the time. And so, we all, you guys have ambitions, I have ambitions, and those are good. And our ambitions are generally aligned with our highest principles. And that isn't a life of integrity. But let's not be so attached to the outcomes, because the more attached we become to the outcomes, the more attached we become to this symbol of the ego of like, well, I'm only successful if I have this, or, am judged in this particular way. And this is the pitfalls of the ego that tells us, we are what we have, we are what people think of us, we are what we accumulate, et cetera. So, and then I think, to your other point of that culture has created a paradigm in which happiness is always something out there, like within our grasp, but not within our heart. And so we, again, back to Buddhism, that this idea of suffering is based around trishna, or unquenchable thirst, unquenchable craving. And there's an image in Buddhism in the Wheel of Life called the hungry ghost, that we end up becoming these beings with huge appetites and massive stomachs, but tiny little mouths, as if we just sipping out of a minuscule straw. And that keeps us in this constant state of,
I want more, I want more, I want more.
more.
Dementors.
And the moment that we achieve that thing or obtain that particular goal, well, we get sort of a momentary biochemical, surge of dopamine or whatever it might be. But then some glittery, shiny object appears on the horizon, and the gap between what we have and what we want opens up again into a chasm. And so then one way of then finding happiness, well, is to continue to chase that thing out there and then achieve it or obtain it. And then again, it gapes open. But that is what's called the hedonic treadmill, because we never we never obtain the thing out there, because there's always another thing to crave and to cling to. And one of the great Stoic meditations or contemplations is to love and to want what you already have. So there's actually a meditation around this, which is you fixate or you focus on something that you have, that you treasure. That's something that is like a family heirloom, or I don't know, could be like your favorite worn in flannel or whatever it happens to be, a relationship that you have in your life. And you focus in on that, on something that you truly cherish that is within your life. And then this initially sounds a bit morose, but it's not. But you imagine then losing that thing that you cherish. And you sit in that for a moment, in that pain and in that grief. And then you come back to the realization that you actually have that thing. And that meditation elicits a sense of incredible gratitude, of thankfulness for what is in your life. And you stop fixating on the thing out there, and you end up loving what you already have.
Yeah, it kind of builds on that idea that the sense of the richest person is not the person who wants the most, it's the person who needs the least. You know, because ultimately you're happy with what you have. So yeah, totally agree. I think that's where...
And I think it comes back into, like, you know, you see, certainly over the last decade, maybe the last 15 years, the word manifesting your dreams or manifesting your dream life. Like, you know, it's quite a common thing in spirituality and, you know, modern positive culture or whatnot. And ultimately, you know, the root of all that tends to be that if you're someone that's hungry for money, like desperately hungry for it, you're less likely to fall, you know, to come into lots of money. Whereas if you're someone that's probably very content with what they have and is still kind of working towards things, but not attached to them, they're probably more likely to get that money. My story wasn't the best there.
No, it was a good effort.
Thanks.
In terms, just to bring it back to anyone listening, that sense of purpose, like I could talk philosophy all day long. I love it. This is one of my favorite areas to talk about. But the sense of purpose, for anyone listening there who's struggling to find a sense of purpose and struggling to kind of connect in with their sense of authentic self, the sense of true north, their sense of what gives them meaning. Are there any kind of suggestions that you'd have for anyone listening that kind of...
Because one thing Steve always says, like when someone asks, because you're a very purposeful creature, and you'll always say, well, like, you know, Elizabeth Gilbert, she wrote a great book on one of her books anyway. And she had the idea that instead of trying to follow your passion, follow your curiosities, because there's much less commitment to them, and just keep following them like you're on a wild scavenger hunt until you know, it unfolds, and before you know it, you've found this great big passion of yours, which was collecting stamps, which you never realized, or whatever it might be. And I thought that was a really lovely analogy, which you used to talk about. And I wonder if you've got any kind of thoughts in that kind of context of someone that's looking for their passion. Like, it's the start of a new year, there's great opportunities. People go, oh, great, right, here we go. 2022 is going to be my year. What's the answer, Jeff?
Well, I do. I also subscribe to that curiosity thread. I think it's a great one. You know, you don't always have to have the clear goal in mind, because life really is process and not product. In fact, the product is the process. So I would...
Could you explain that a little more? Explain that a little more, because there's so much wisdom in that, like, very phrase. Life is more about the process rather than the product.
Yeah, well, tomorrow never comes. And yesterday didn't exist. All we have at our disposal is the everlasting now, is this very moment, and this one, and this one. And so
what the more
that one too, I'll give you that one. Although, I don't know, it's a little sketchy. So, you know, when we are living only in the future, then we're not here. And so we can degrade our process, the actual experience of what it is like to be alive, in pursuit of some sort of, intangible future that may or may not come to pass. So, you know, I think, you know, day to day, moment to moment, how are you going to focus your attention? Because when you really dissect what it is like to be human and these notions of free will, you know, you didn't choose your parents, you didn't choose your genetics, you didn't choose the environment or the era in which you were born, you didn't choose the religious or economic or cultural systems of your country. You know, you didn't choose a lot of these things. You didn't choose all the chains of prior causal events that, you know, then instantiate the realities of your life. You didn't choose serendipity and randomness that might happen to occur at any moment. But you do have some agency. And that agency, as far as I can tell, is where we focus our attention moment to moment. So ask yourself that seminal question, if you're listening and going into this year: where am I focusing my attention moment to moment. Because as I said, as far as I've been able to excavate, that is the crack in the window of agency, of free will. So moment to moment, who am I going to be? How am I going to show up? Okay. Then there is obviously goals and projects and what I might call sort of the contents of consciousness. If we're living just kind of as pure consciousness all the time, moment to moment, well, it's hard to have friends and make plans and run businesses that way, so we're balancing between living within this kind of field of awareness and being very present and being kind of cultivating this sacred, non-judgmental presence with the contents of consciousness. How are we going to plan in the projects of our life? So, when you brought up manifesting, there is this notion, and this is something I think Wayne Dyer probably brought first into my awareness, but this idea of two concepts of manifesting. One is manifesting from the end. So what does that mean? It's getting very, very clear about a particular project or business or relationship or goal in yourself, and really getting a lot of fluency around what that is and what that looks like and what that means, and then manifesting from the end. So every day when you wake up, you really are just chopping wood and carrying water in service of this very clearly identified mission. Because when you are focused around mission, you're generally designing that in alignment with your highest principles, okay? Like, I want to have an impact. I want to bring wellness modalities and meditation and personal growth and regenerative agriculture, all these things that I'm focused on. I want to bring them to 1 billion people. That's a great goal to have. There's nothing wrong with having that goal. But because every day when I wake up, I'm really just chopping wood and carrying water in service of that goal. And so it doesn't become confusing, and I can then really focus on process. So I would say, get really clear about where you want to go. And then Wayne Dyer also brought this other concept of manifesting, which is you don't need to manifest anything into your life. You need to manifest who you already are. And at first that rings a little woo-woo to me, to be honest. But there is great wisdom in it. We obviously all need to have our basic needs met. We need food, we need water, we need shelter, we need clothes, we need belonging. We need a sense of self-worth. And those are qualities that we all need to establish as lower ends of the pyramid on this hierarchy of needs. But if we can establish those things, everything else that sits on the top of that pyramid, self-realization, the ability to really improve the condition of humanity, the ability to be creative day in and day out, all of those things we already have. They all lie inherently within us. And so in that sense, we just need to manifest who we already are. And a lot of that is just, again, where you're going to put your attention moment to moment.
Wow. I like the way you wrapped that up, brought it back to where you started. Back to focus, back to present.
Okay, there's so many topics here. I'm really enjoying this so much. It really is. There's so many spiritual nuggets of wisdom that I'm getting great things out of. And there was a couple of when I was reading lots of stuff earlier and kind of going, okay, what are we going to talk to Jeff about? And Steve said, right, belonging and purpose. Yeah, let's definitely talk about that. That'd be great fun. Let's see what we can chat about that. And then there was another two things which came up when I was because there's so much stuff. You've been very productive in your 51 years. And I'm wondering about community and connection. They're two words, because obviously you have commune as being your, where we originally got in touch with you, your brilliant online business where where your goal is to reach 1 billion people and influence them in terms of wellness and meditation and whatnot. And I just wonder on your thoughts in terms of community and connection and, how that is in the world today and your basic thoughts. Like, it's a massive question, but really your thoughts on the topic of community and the need for it right now with each one of us.
Yeah. Well, I can't remember which of you mentioned the fact that we tend to sanctify the individual more than ever at this moment. And we all have a certain self. We all have personal histories, and we have a underlying nucleotide sequence that informs our DNA. So I'm not going to say that there's no self at all. But it's every spiritual and philosophical tradition really points us to cultivating a sense of non-self or connection, or kind of sense that we're part of something greater. In fact, spirituality might be just defined as this realization that we're all connected by something that is greater than us. And, I've certainly been disturbed and concerned. If there's anything that should unveil our complete mutual interdependence, it's a viral pandemic, because obviously the nature of how viruses spread points to interconnection and human connectivity. And in my mind, this could be something that we could rally around to rediscover our sense of the collective good. And in some countries and in some cultures, people have done that. And there has been a tremendous self-sacrifice in the name of the collective good. And in many of those countries that have been successful, they've discovered that the collective good and individual rights have turned out to be one and the same thing, because the cultures that were able to cohere and actually beat back coronavirus, in some cases without even the vaccine, are the countries that have the most individual freedoms. So it is a conundrum on some level, but it goes to show that when we actually come together and we value each other in a particular way and are willing to have the courage to make certain sacrifices for each other, then that also enhances our ability to be free as individuals. But, on a greater meta level about community, I mean, obviously our species is hardwired for connection. Every single human project of worth has been predicated on our ability to cooperate flexibly at scale. So we look at bees, bees cooperate flexibly, bees cooperate at scale, but not necessarily flexibly, like the queen dies or whatever. The chimps, can cooperate with a certain amount of flexibility, but not at scale. But humans do have the ability, to connect with each other and accomplish incredible things, but it requires cooperation, and it also requires sort of an intersubjective understanding of reality. And, what has been so degraded over the past decade, but certainly over the past few years, has been this basic sense of epistemology. Like, we just don't agree on the truth anymore. And, we're all served up little fragments of truth that are algorithmically curated for each one of us, that fuels our tribalism and extremism and social and political polarization, et cetera. And so I think it's really hard right now to find community and cooperation because we're so isolated. And, we've been led down so many of these extreme paths. And, it's very hard to delineate between fact and fiction and, all of the prevalence of misinformation, et cetera. So, we have, I think, perhaps the greatest challenge before us is rediscovering our collective humanity and finding common ground. And I think that the only way to do that is having conversation, a really difficult, thorny conversation with each other, being in community with each other, because community almost always moderates and it always dulls the edges. When you're just doing, private acts happening in public on Facebook or on Twitter, it's very easy to demean and dehumanize someone else. I mean, if you spend any time on those platforms, it's basically just ad hominem soup. But when we're face to face, it's hard to hate up close. And, I see this over and over again. When people actually come together in the same room, you might be, take any, inflammatory issue, like abortion in this country. It's like there's pro-life people and, they're like looking down their nose with moral indignation at the left to be like, how dare you not respect the life of the unborn? And then people on the left have the same moral indignation and they're looking back at the people on the right and they're screaming, how dare you not, respect the right of a woman and the right to choose, what happens to her own body. And they're just screaming at each other. And it's so much easier just to scream at each other, because if we actually tempered our tempers, we'd actually realize that both sides are based in something deeply moral it's almost morally unassailable, both sides. And it's only when people actually come face to face and have, some of these conversations and recognize each other's true common humanity, be like, oh, well, you're coming from a moral place. I'm coming from a moral place. Let's actually address solutions, to a common problem. And so, I see like this in like my friend, Dr. Mark Hyman, he's running clinical trials at the Cleveland Clinic, treating diabetics in two different groups. He's treating one as a group and one as individuals. And the recovery rate amongst the people that he's treating in a group is like 3 or 4x the people that are being treated as individuals.
Brilliant.
I see this. Yeah, I see this. There's a woman who started this initiative in Denver, building gardens, community gardens. And I think they've built 200 community gardens in Denver, Colorado. And they did a clinical study along the way, and they're showing rates of, anxiety and depression amongst people that have engaged in this community garden effort with a control group of people who haven't. And the levels of depression and anxiety just zoom right down. And because people are in community, they're getting their hands dirty with other people. And so over and over again, we learn, this lesson that, we are absolutely 100% social creatures. In fact, your epigenetics and mine are changing. The expression of our DNA and our genes and what's happening in our cells are changing right now in this conversation, just through our interaction with each other. So this is, these notions that I am this individual self, this sovereign body. I didn't make my own oxygen. I didn't make glycolysis. I didn't make the Krebs cycle. I didn't make any of these things. These things, I'm more than half bacteria and fungi and archaea. And so this notion that I am this stable, reliable self separate from the rest of the world is just an illusion. And you can look at medical science to prove that, or you can look at Eastern religions to prove that. But we really, really just need at this time to find ways to establish a greater sense of connectivity.
Wow. I think it comes back to like when you talked about the two different people in the same room with different opinions, it comes right back to what you were talking about, compassion and empathy, you know, those being two of the biggest things. And then, there was something else clever I was going to say there, but I forgot it now. So sorry about that.
Well, compassion wasn't compassion being the highest thing, because compassion had a positive valence versus
look, good
empathy
listener.
had a more neutral valence.
Good
There
listener.
we go.
No, but it was back to what you were talking about, the lady who you interviewed yesterday, whose son got killed in the massacre, and back to that she, through compassion, through empathy, and through actually taking the time, she managed to forgive the person who actually killed her son. And I think it's only that when you said when you bring people together in a room, when you can actually understand the other person, that's when, like, and we live in a small town in Ireland, which is, you know, we would have had lots of ideas about how the world should be. But when you're out there amongst such a differing views of opinion, it is a melting pot where it's almost like cooking a pot of soup. Like, you know, the carrots can't just be carrots. They kind of blend with the onions and the tomatoes, and it forms this cacophony of soup. And you add a bit of salt and boom, you got a lovely recipe.
And it rounds your edges.
Yeah.
Which is what the edges. That's exactly right. That's exactly what it is. Right. Carrots become flavored with onions and vice versa. And what we really want, and I think about this a lot visually, or before I say what we want, I'll say kind of how I am witnessing the state of the human condition right now. We seem to be in a world that's increasingly flat with spikes at the edges. So, we have in this country Republicans and Democrats, and it keeps getting more and more extreme, and every issue is defined in these binary oppositions and polar opposites, et cetera. But it's not just politics. I mean, we are growing wheat, soy, corn, and sorghum, and nothing else. We have tens of billions of humans, pigs, cows, and chickens, and no other species. We have 3 people in the United States that own more collective wealth than the bottom 50% combined. We are increasingly have this flat world with just a spike at the end, or spikes at the end. And again, if we talk kind of earlier in our conversation, we talk about the logos, the kind of foundational intelligence of nature. Nature is the opposite of that. Nature wants abundant biodiversity. Nature wants the bell curve. Nature doesn't want a flat earth with spikes at the end. Nature wants abundant biodiversity. It wants a huge middle class with a local jazz club and a local newspaper, and basically everything that you guys are doing in your town. It's like what nature wants is vegetable garden and all sorts of different crops. This is what we're looking for, is what I often see as a bush. It's a sort of two-dimensionally, it's portrayed as a bell curve, but we want something clumpy. We want something that looks like the brain or the vascular system or the gut, all of these expressions of nature, or a mycelium network, that goes underneath into our soil, that looks almost exactly like neurons in a brain. If you actually look at the image of it, we want these kind of clumpy, interconnected kinds of systems. We don't want this flat earth. And so I think, this is, when we talk about, well, what do we need to do to kind of reorganize culture and society? Well, what we also want is that soup of ideas. We want a multiplicity of ideas, because like when nature takes biodiversity and it clumps it together, it ends up selecting for the best ones. And so if we treat ideas like genes, and we can have real public discourse and a variety and multiplicity of interesting and different ideas coming from all sorts of places, then it follows that nature will also select the best ideas. But when we have this flat universe, we don't have very many ideas. We have just the ideas that exist at the very, very edge. And just by the laws of nature, those aren't going to yield the best ones. So when I think about a visual representation of what the world should look like, it should look like a tree or a bush, this 3-dimensional bell curve of all these kind of intersecting networks. And I think that is a portrayal of health that we see in the human body and in nature, in natural systems and terrestrial systems everywhere. And we should do our best to live in accordance with nature.
Beautiful.
I love that. That's a beautiful place, I think, to park this. That sense of the sense of celebrating diversity, the sense of hearing one another and allowing others and other voices to be celebrated, to be given room to allow breathe and develop and grow and prosper.
But I know we're landing the ship now, but it's very difficult to see it in the current state of the world now, where there's so much power and so much resources with so few. And all the rest of us kind of in the middle, feeling like you're less and less relevant by the day and more of a drone within the machine. It's kind of hard to go, wow, how is this ship going to turn around? Like, where's this bell curve coming?
It's in essence the sense of local, taking back the sense of civil responsibility and the civil power, that the sense of it's the individual that celebrates the togetherness, not just leaving it up, oh, I'm part of this system. You are the system. We are the system. We all have the power to change it. And it's into our daily actions, the sense of celebrating diversity, taking responsibility, engaging in our towns, engaging our communities, rather than sitting back and giving out and whinging and saying, why aren't they doing this? Get involved and make change. We all have the power to create the world we want.
Nice.
Amen.
Good one, Steve. I
Yeah.
like that. Okay, good one. Yeah, I like that. That's a good place to wrap up. Jeff, you're great. You really are. I enjoyed this. That was like...
You're so elegant. You're eloquent. Sorry, you're like a poet.
Yeah, you're very easy to listen to as well. Like, it's very easy, like, because there's so much going on. Like, you're really smart. It's great.
Well,
well done.
Yeah, I'm still synthesizing, to be honest. And I'll just say that I'm just a product of plagiarism or synthesis, however you want to categorize it. I've had just the extraordinary fortune to be around brilliant people all the time. And, over time, there's a little osmosis that takes place, where I'm just gleaning the best ideas of all of these incredible people that I've gotten to be around. And then, over time, you begin to synthesize. And right now, I'm just kind of like I try to recognize where I am along that journey. I'm just like a hose. I'm just kind of like, word salading in your direction. But, the more one does that, and it's sort of this kind of back and forth between listening and then expressing, the more one does synthesize and then hone an understanding of the world. And it's great fun. And I'm very appreciative of the opportunity to do it with you guys. And I really, I exhort everyone to do it, because it's what makes life vibrant and fun, and it's part of that curiosity journey. So subject yourself to all sorts of ideas,
And on exactly what you said in terms of purpose, you said presence within relationships. And right now, something which I've thoroughly enjoyed in this is actually being really present and listening to you within this relationship which we're having right now. And it's it definitely has given great purpose to me. So
I would actually recommend that everyone in the world hosts a podcast, only because it forces you to be 100% present for 60 or 90 minutes. It is like a meditation, because you are absolutely here and now. You are not checking any device. You're not responding to any notifications. Your mind is not wandering any other place. I am here with you guys 100%. And that is the great blessing of actually hosting or being on a podcast. And in a way, it's a trick. So you trick yourself into being present by having this overlay of a podcast. So in that way, I actually I advise everyone to host a podcast or something like it. And it might just be putting aside 90 minutes to have an absolutely uninterrupted conversation with people that you're really interested in. And I suppose that's what we've done today.
100%. Couldn't agree with you more. Totally. Jeff, for anyone listening, how can they find out more about your wonderful work? Because I know you've Wanderlust, you've One Commune, and then
You've got 3 books. Commusings, which came out recently. Like Commune's brilliant. There's so much content on that. Really.
Anyway, we shouldn't answer.
Yeah,
Jeff, you have.
Yeah, I just go to onecommune.com. It's onecommune.com. And, there you'll find all of these amazing teachers that I've referred to from Wim Hof and Byron Katie and Russell Brand and Marianne Williamson, Deepak Chopra. So we've made these brilliant, Zach Bush, all these brilliant video courses. I think over 100 of them. God bless Jacob, my partner. And so there's a huge library of online courses that we've really thrown our soul into. And then, as I said, I'm fortunate enough to host a podcast every week where I have conversations with different folks. And that's called the Commune Podcast. And you can access that through the onecommune.com website or just on Apple Podcasts. So that's it.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jeff. You're amazing. You really are such a... I love that. I love getting deep into philosophy. I love it.
Thanks, Mel, for this, Jeff.
Yeah, thank you guys. And we'll talk with you guys soon.
Thank you for listening. We really appreciate it and hope you got something out of it. Jeff is so easy to listen to.
He's so eloquent.
I want to be really smart like him.
His words were so beautiful, so gracious, so conceptual. It was lovely to kind of hang around veil. Or valence.
Valence of emotions. I thought there was 2 words. It was valence of emotion. What was the other one? It was like something beginning with S.
There was loads of big words anyway.
Really
got to work on our words.
Beautiful, really, in terms of purpose and belonging, purpose and meaning. I thought those were beautiful ones that in terms of presence in your relationships, which all of us could do it more of that. Certainly I think of it in myself. Presence within our work and creativity. Beautiful. And then the last one was presence within suffering, which is a little more difficult.
And the big thing that I got was the sense of moving beyond our sense of I. So much of our life, at least my life, is consumed with I want, I need. And the more I think the true sense of union in our life, and the sense of, self-actualization is a sense of moving beyond the sense of I and into the collective, the sense of that your happiness is my happiness, your sadness is my sadness. And the more we can move towards a society that celebrates that.
And also taking context that I think, as they say on an airplane, put your own life jacket on first, not everyone else's. Because I think it's a bit like Gabor Mate says, like the people sometimes that don't think of themselves at all can often, he says, what's his book called? So I think it's a fine balance with it all.
Yeah, of course.
But anyway,
there's no absolutes.
I hope you really enjoyed this. I genuinely do. Jeff, you'll find him on Instagram. You'll find One Commune on Instagram. You'll find them on their websites. They're really, really brilliant.
Of course, they're fabulous. And Jeff is just I've gone through
lots of them. They're brilliant. They're fantastic. He's glorious, as you know, and so is his team. So big shout out to them. And thanks to you for making it this far. As Jeff mentioned, like this is one of the greatest things that came out of last year was starting a podcast, and we're so grateful you made it this far. So thanks to you. We really appreciate
massive
your
shout
attention.
out to the wonderful Shawnee Cahill and Sarah Fawcett, who are here with us and who produce this joy, which we adore. Anyway,
thanks, Mel. Bye. Oh, and if you share this on social media and Instagram, we'll just share it as well. So please do tag us and we'll just share it on. So thanks, Mel.
Bye. Thanks.